There is a very specific moment that happens every single month, and almost no one notices its emotional weight because it lasts only a few seconds, sometimes minutes, but it defines the rest of your entire month. That moment is when the payment hits your account and you look at the balance and feel a strange mix of relief and fear at the same time, as if for a few seconds the air comes back into your lungs. But along with that relief comes a silent pressure, saying that it won't last, that this money already has an owner, that it's already committed before you even decide anything. And it's exactly at this point that most people lose money without spending anything, without making any bad purchase, without doing anything crazy, simply because they don't do one simple thing at the right moment. And maybe right now you're thinking this doesn't make sense, because losing money usually seems tied to overspending, buying useless things, messing up, installments. But no, the most common way to lose money is emotional, invisible, silent, and it happens right after the paycheck hits. When you're still tired from the month that just ended, when your head is still heavy, when you just want to feel like you survived one more time. At the beginning of the month, what almost everyone does is exactly the same thing. Whether they earn little, earn a bit more, or even consider themselves organized. The person looks at the balance, does a quick mental calculation, remembers some obvious bills, water, electricity, internet, maybe a credit card, maybe a loan, and tells themselves they'll organize it better later, that they'll look at it calmly afterward, that now is not the moment because they just worked the entire month, because they're tired, because they just want to breathe a little. And this decision seems small, harmless, but it creates a very specific feeling that will follow you for the next 30 days. The feeling that the money is there, but it's not under control. The feeling that you're always reacting, always putting out fires, always fixing things at the last minute. And this generates a kind of anxiety that isn't explosive. It's constant. It's that weight in the back of your head that makes you think about money even when you don't want to. Even when you're trying to rest, even when you're trying to enjoy something simple. And the problem is that when this anxiety sets in, your financial decisions stop being decisions and turn into impulses. Maybe you've already felt this without being able to explain it properly. That month when the salary even seemed sufficient on paper, but the money disappeared too fast. Not because you spent it on something big, but because everything felt urgent. Everything felt necessary. Everything felt deserved. And when you realize it, you're back in that tight feeling again. Counting days, avoiding opening the bank app, hoping no unexpected expense shows up, and then comes the guilt, that internal conversation telling you that you should be more responsible, that you should control yourself more, that you should have more discipline. And that conversation hurts because you know you're not living a luxury life. You know you're not splurging, you know you work hard, and even so, it feels like the money never keeps up. It feels like you're always starting from zero, always chasing, always behind in life. And this is exactly where the trap is. Because when you live like this for a long time, you start to think this is normal, that everyone lives this way, that there's not much you can do, that it's just reality. And this belief keeps you from noticing that there is a critical moment that, if handled differently, would completely change how your entire month feels. And I'm not talking about spreadsheets. I'm not talking about complicated calculations. I'm not talking about miracle methods. I'm talking about a simple gesture that almost no one makes when the payment hits. And that's why almost everyone feels like they work a lot and move very little. What almost no one realizes is that the problem isn't the lack of money itself. It's the lack of emotional direction for that money at the moment it arrives. Because when the payment comes in and you don't clearly decide anything, your brain goes into defense mode. It starts protecting that amount as if it were too scarce, too fragile, and at the same time it starts spending in a disorganized way to relieve stress. And this contradiction is what creates that feeling of silent chaos, where you don't feel in control, but you also don't feel like you can relax. And living in this in-between state is extremely exhausting. More exhausting than being completely broke, because at least when you're totally broke, you know exactly where you are. But in this middle ground, you live on alert all the time. Now, maybe you're wondering what exactly should be done in this moment, but hold that question for a bit, because before talking about that, it's important to understand why doing nothing when the salary hits creates a domino effect that follows you until the next payment. Because this isn't about math, it's about behavior. It's about how your brain reacts to uncertainty. And when you understand this, a lot of things start to make sense, including that strange feeling of anxiety even in months that didn't go that badly. When the money hits your account and you leave it sitting there without separating it, without giving it a clear destination, without creating a minimal barrier between what is a commitment and what is a choice. You are telling yourself, without realizing it, that everything can turn into a problem at any moment. And the brain hates that. The brain hates not knowing what is protected and what is at risk. And when it doesn't have that information, it assumes the worst case scenario. It assumes that any expense could be dangerous. And at the same time that any pleasure is urgent, because tomorrow there might be nothing. And that's how you enter that cycle of spending to relieve tension and then feeling guilty for spending, promising that next month will be different, but repeating everything again because nothing changed at the root. And the cruelest part of all this is that this cycle drains not only money, but mental energy, clarity, the sense of capability, and you start to doubt yourself. You start to think you're just bad with money, that it will always be this way, that the problem is you, when in reality, the problem is that no one ever taught you to treat the moment of payment as the most important moment of the month. Not because of the amount that comes in, but because of the psychological impact it has. Because that's where you decide whether the rest of the month will be lived in survival mode or in control mode. Maybe now you're recognizing yourself in parts of this. Maybe you're remembering the last payment. Maybe you're remembering that feeling of looking at the balance and at the same time feeling a tightness in your chest. And if that's happening, it's because this video isn't about saving pennies. It's about stopping the bleeding of mental energy. It's about stopping losing money in the most silent way that exists, which is losing clarity, losing direction, losing the feeling of command over your own financial life. These first 2 moments of the script are just to help you see something that was always there but went unnoticed. And in the next chapters, I'll go deeper into why this mistake is so common, why it seems harmless, and how it connects directly to the feeling of always being behind in life, even when you're doing everything right. But before continuing, I need to know one thing. There is a cruel detail in this mistake that almost no one notices because it doesn't hurt right away. It doesn't cause an immediate scare. It doesn't show up as a late bill on the first day of the month. It slowly corrodes your sense of security. And when you realize it, you're back in that routine of mental tightness again, even if the money is still there. And that confuses your mind because you look at the balance and think you shouldn't be feeling this way, but you are. And you start to think the problem is too psychological, that it's exaggeration, that it's weakness, when in reality it's just a lack of structure at the most sensitive moment of the month. What happens is that when the payment hits and you don't do anything immediately, you push forward the most important decision, which is deciding what that money represents. And when you don't decide, the environment decides for you. Bank notifications, bills arriving, the card being used, small everyday purchases, everything starts pulling that money in different directions. And each small amount going out reinforces an internal feeling of loss, even if it's something necessary, even if it's something small. Because the brain isn't seeing a plan being executed. It's seeing something slipping away. And every time something slips away without a clear context, anxiety increases a little more. Maybe you've already experienced this in a very concrete way. That day, when you open the bank app just to check and realize the balance is already much lower than you imagined, even without remembering exactly where it went. And this feeling is one of the worst that exists, because it mixes surprise, frustration, and guilt. And guilt almost always comes with a silent promise that next month you'll organize better, pay more attention, write everything down. But the next month arrives, the payment hits, and the tiredness is the same. The urge to postpone is the same, and the cycle repeats. Not because you're irresponsible, but because you're trying to solve a structural problem with willpower, and that never works for long. And the more this cycle repeats, the more you enter that state of constant vigilance where you think about money all the time. Even when you're really not spending, even when you're nodding dead, even when nothing has gone wrong yet. It's background noise that never turns off. And this noise wears you down, makes you less patient, less confident, less willing to think about the future. Because thinking about the future starts to feel scary, starts to feel too distant, almost offensive, as if planning were a luxury that doesn't fit your current reality. The problem is that living like this always puts you one step behind, because when any unexpected event shows up, an extra expense delay, an opportunity that requires some money, you don't react calmly. You react with desperation or denial. And neither of those reactions is good. And that's where many people start to get into debt without realizing it. Not because of big mistakes, but because of decisions made under pressure. Installments taken just to buy time, credit card limits used to buy temporary peace, small loans that seem harmless but pile up, and when you look back, you realize that a good part of this could have been avoided if the month had started differently. There is a very common lie that people tell themselves, which is thinking that financial organization is something you do when you have extra time, when you have extra money, when life is calmer. But the truth is exactly the opposite. Organization isn't for when everything is fine. It's precisely for when everything is confusing. And the moment of payment is the only moment in the month when you have a real chance to create this minimal order. Because it's the only moment when the money hasn't been pulled in every direction yet. It's the only moment when you can say, even silently, this here is protected. This here is a commitment. This here is a choice. And just this separation already completely changes the way you breathe throughout the month. And notice that up to now, I haven't talked about cutting expenses. I haven't talked about stopping living. I haven't talked about giving up simple things, because that's not the point. The point is that when you don't create this structure right at the beginning, you spend the entire month trying to adapt to what's happening instead of simply following something that was already decided. And that creates a constant feeling of improvisation. Like you're always winging it, always fixing things at the last minute, always a little tense. And living like this is more tiring than working, because there is no mental rest when everything feels uncertain. Maybe now it's starting to make sense why months that weren't financially disastrous still left you exhausted, irritated, unwilling to think about the future. And this isn't weakness. It's a direct consequence of living without a minimal base of predictability. And that base doesn't come from how much you earn. It comes from how you treat money in the minute it arrives. Because that minute determines whether your brain will go into exaggerated protection mode or into calm execution mode. And before showing you what really changes this scenario, it's important to break a belief that gets in the way for a lot of people. The idea that to have control, you need to understand everything, track everything, write everything down. Because that scares people away, pushes them back, makes them postpone even more. And the truth is that control isn't knowing every cent. Control is knowing that there is a minimal order being respected, even when you're not looking. And that feeling that something is working in the background is what brings back peace, not excessive attention. In the next chapters, I'll show you why. Trying to control everything generates even more anxiety. Why leaving money too visible can be a problem. And how a simple change in the way you start the month can completely transform how you feel about money, even without earning more, even without cutting your life back. But before moving on, I want to confirm something with you. There is something that almost no one admits out loud, but that many people feel every month, which is the fear of looking at their own money too early. Because looking too early means facing reality before being emotionally ready. And that's why so many people leave it for later, for the end of the day, for the end of the week, for when there's time, as if postponing were a form of protection. But this postponement has an invisible cost. Because while you don't look, while you don't decide, your mind keeps creating scenarios, imagining risks, anticipating losses, and this creates a tension that doesn't go away. It just sits there, taking up mental space, draining energy, and when you finally look, you're already more tired than you needed to be. And that's why the moment of payment is usually emotionally confusing, because it carries two things at the same time: the hope that this time it will work, and the fear that once again it won't. And when these two emotions mix, the brain freezes. It prefers not to decide anything, prefers to keep everything open, because deciding means taking responsibility, and taking responsibility when you're already tired feels too heavy. So you go on autopilot, and autopilot almost never works in your favor. Maybe you've already noticed that in months when you try to control everything manually, checking the balance all the time, reviewing every expense, the exhaustion is even greater, because you become emotionally attached to every small expense. And every small expense turns into a microstress, even when it's something normal, expected, necessary. And this creates a draining relationship with money, as if it were always judging you, always reminding you that you can't make mistakes. And living like this makes anyone want to run away from the subject, avoid it, procrastinate. What few people understand is that it's not the lack of control that creates anxiety. It's the wrong kind of control. It's trying to monitor instead of structuring, trying to track instead of deciding. And this starts way back on the first day of the month. When the money comes in and you don't create a clear separation, even if simple, even if imperfect. Because without this separation, everything gets mixed together: obligation with choice, need with desire, present with future. And when everything is mixed, any decision feels wrong. Any expense feels like guilt. Any leftover feels too small. And this slowly destroys motivation. There's also a perverse emotional effect in all of this, which is the feeling of always owing something to the future, as if you were borrowing today's money from your future self. And this feeling weighs on you because it creates a constant psychological debt. You feel like you're always leaving something for later, always postponing an organization that never comes. And this undermines self-esteem because you start to see yourself as someone who can't get their life in order, even when trying, even when working, even when making an effort. And then comes that silent comparison with other people, with stories you see, with offhand comments, with the idea that everyone else seems more organized, calmer, more ahead. And that hurts because you know it's not a lack of effort, but you can't explain exactly where the mistake is. And when you can't explain it, the tendency is to blame yourself, to shut down, to carry it alone, as if it were a personal flaw. When in reality, it's just a poorly built pattern repeating every month. In the next moments of this script, I'll show you why most people try to solve this problem the wrong way. Why common advice only increases the feeling of failure. And what the silent turning point is that happens when you change the way you deal with money right at the beginning of the month. Not to become another person, not to live for control, but to finally feel that money stopped being a constant weight on your mind and became just a part of life, as it should be. There is a point where a person starts to confuse financial exhaustion with lack of money. But these are different things, because many times the money does come in, but it comes into a completely emotionally messy environment. And everything that enters a messy environment turns into mess too, no matter the amount. And that's why increasing income for many people solves nothing. It only increases the size of the problem, because the month keeps starting the same way, without direction, without decision, without a clear moment of command. The hardest thing to notice is that this mess isn't visible. It's not a desk full of papers. It's not a late bill right at the beginning. It's an internal mess, a feeling that money controls you more than you control it. And when that happens, every financial choice comes loaded with emotion, fear, guilt, or urgency. And emotional decisions are almost never good decisions, not because the person is weak, but because the emotion wasn't made to organize. It was made to react. And then something very common happens. The person starts treating money as if it were something dangerous, something that needs to be watched all the time, as if any slip could turn into a disaster. And living like this consumes an absurd amount of energy because you never truly relax, never feel that things are at least somewhat under control. And when you don't relax, you start seeking small compensations, small reliefs, small rewards. And these rewards almost always cost money. Not because you're irresponsible, but because a tired brain needs some feeling of immediate pleasure. That's the point where many people ask why it feels like money slips away precisely when they try hardest to hold on to it. And the answer is uncomfortable, because holding isn't the same as guiding. Holding creates tension. Guiding creates flow. And when you only hold, money becomes a constant source of stress, not a tool. And that makes every expense turn into an internal conflict, even necessary ones. And living in conflict is exhausting. It wears you down. It makes you want to give up trying to improve. Maybe you've already felt this in that month when you decided you were going to pay more attention, but ended up even more irritated, more frustrated, more tired. And this happens because attention without structure turns into surveillance. And constant surveillance is unsustainable. No one can live policing themselves all the time. And when a person can't take it anymore, they let everything go at once as an unconscious way to free themselves from pressure. And then comes guilt, regret, and the promise to try again next month. What changes everything isn't monitoring, it's deciding beforehand. Because when you decide beforehand, you don't need to decide again with every expense, every bill, every small choice. And that frees up mental space, restores energy, restores clarity. And that's exactly what almost no one does when the payment hits. Because no one taught that that moment isn't just financial, it's psychological. It's the moment when you tell yourself whether this month will be lived in tightness or in control. And when I say control, I don't mean rigid control, suffocating control. I mean control in the sense of knowing there is a base, that the essentials are separated, that the rest is choice. And this simple distinction completely changes how you feel when you spend, because you stop spending out of fear and start spending with awareness. Even if it's little, even if it's simple, And this internal change is the beginning of the shift. There comes a moment when a person is so used to starting the month improvising that they no longer realize it's a choice. It just seems like the way life works. And this is the most dangerous point, because when something becomes normal, we stop questioning it. And when we stop questioning, we stop changing. And that's how years go by, with the feeling that nothing moves forward, even while working, even while trying, even while doing the right thing. And what's curious is that most people think the problem is in the middle of the month, when money gets tight, when unexpected things come up, when the balance starts to scare them. But the problem almost never starts there. It starts on the first day, in the first hours after the payment hits, in that moment when you could take command but choose to postpone. Not out of laziness, not out of irresponsibility, but out of emotional exhaustion, because you're already coming from a heavy month, accumulated worries, and deciding feels like it requires an energy you feel you don't have. But it's precisely that initial decision that saves energy later. And that's the part almost no one tells you. Because financial organization isn't about making more effort. It's about stopping the waste of effort. It's about preventing the entire month from becoming a sequence of exhausting It's about not having to negotiate with yourself at every expense, every bill, every invitation, every small desire. Because when everything is decided from the beginning, you just execute, and executing is much less tiring than deciding under pressure. There is a very specific relief that happens when you start the month, knowing, even in a simple way, what is protected and what is free. And that relief doesn't come from seeing a high number in your account. It comes from knowing that the basics no longer depend on your mood, your memory, or your willpower. It comes from the feeling that even if you don't think about money for a few days, nothing will fall apart. And this feeling completely changes your relationship with the month, with work, with the future. And here's something important that breaks a lot of expectations. This decision doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be detailed. It doesn't have to predict everything, because the brain doesn't need perfection to relax. It needs direction. It needs to feel that someone is in command, even if that someone is you for 5 minutes right after the payment hits. And when that happens, something changes internally. You stop feeling like a hostage to the balance and start feeling responsible for it. And responsibility is much lighter than surveillance. When you don't do this, every expense becomes a threat. Every outflow of money feels like a potential mistake. And that creates a financial life based on fear. But when you do it, even in a simple way, money stops being a silent enemy and becomes just a limited resource. And dealing with limits is much healthier than dealing with fear, because limits are clear. Fear is diffuse, and what exhausts you is the diffuse, not the concrete. The thing almost no one does when the payment hits is to take command immediately, even if just for a few minutes, even if in a simple, almost imperfect way, because most people leave the money loose in the account, mixed, available for everything at the same time. And when everything is available, nothing is safe. And the brain notices that instantly, even if you don't consciously realize it. What changes everything is separating before living, not after. Because afterward, the tiredness has already won. The decisions have already been made on impulse. The money has already gained its own stories. And separating afterward becomes a patch, an attempt to fix something that already started crooked. While separating at the beginning is like aligning your head before you start running. It's creating a minimal track so the month doesn't derail. And when I say separate, I don't mean splitting into 1,000 parts. I don't mean creating a complex system. It's much simpler than you imagine. It's deciding right when the money comes in, what cannot be touched under any circumstances, and taking that out of your field of vision. Because as long as that money is visible, it isn't protected. It's being mentally negotiated every day, and every negotiation is exhausting. Maybe you've never thought about it this way, but money that sits in your main account isn't neutral. It's emotionally active. It's calling for attention. It's being considered for everything from an unexpected bill to a small treat to relieve stress. And every time you consider that money for something that wasn't the original purpose, you feel a small loss, even if you don't spend it. And these accumulated small losses are what make the month feel heavy. When you immediately separate what is commitment, what is essential, what guarantees the month won't turn into chaos, something changes instantly, because the brain understands that there is a base, that there is a floor, and with that, it stops going into constant alert mode. And this change isn't theoretical. It's physical. You sleep a little better. You think less about money during the day. You feel less guilt when spending what's left. Because now what's left is a choice, not a threat. And notice how different this is from most advice out there. No one is telling you to cut everything, deprive yourself, become another person. What changes is the order. First, you protect, then you live. Not the other way around, because when you live first and protect later, there is almost never energy left, neither money nor mental space to protect anything. The mistake that makes people lose money isn't spending. It's starting the month without protecting the basics. It's starting the month leaving everything open, undefined, subject to tiredness and mood. And when money depends on mood, it almost always disappears too fast. When this separation starts happening every month, something very subtle begins to change. You stop waking up with the feeling that you're already behind, that you're chasing losses. And you start to feel that the month has already begun, decided. Even if money is tight, even if bills are heavy, the feeling is different. Because now there is a minimal plan being executed quietly. And this restores an emotional dignity that many people don't even realize they lost. The effect of this shows up in unexpected places. You start accepting invitations without that immediate fear of ruining the entire month. You start saying no with less guilt, because now the no comes from a decision, not from a diffuse fear. You start looking at work differently because work stops being just a desperate race to survive until the next payment and becomes part of a system that works, even if it's still far from ideal. Over time, this simple base creates something very powerful: predictability. And predictability is what allows you to think about the future without panic. Even if that future is still simple, even if it's just the next month, the next step, the next small improvement. And when you can think like that, financial life stops being a constant source of anxiety and becomes just one aspect of life, important, but not dominant, present, but not oppressive. And maybe the most important of all is the impact on how you see yourself. Because stopping living on improvisation restores a sense of capability. You start trusting yourself more. You start feeling that you can sustain decisions, that you can keep agreements with yourself. And this changes everything. Because money isn't just numbers. It's identity. It's self-esteem. It's how you position yourself in the world. And when this area starts to organize, even slowly, other areas follow. This is how you stop losing money without noticing. Not because you became an expert, not because you earn more, but because you stopped bleeding mental energy. You stopped making decisions under pressure. You stopped letting the month decide for you. And you started deciding for the month, even with fear at first, because fear shrinks when structure appears. And if you made it this far, you probably felt at some point that this was about you. Not in an accusatory way, but in a welcoming way. Like someone finally putting into words something you always felt but never knew how to explain. And if this made sense, if it organized something inside you, it's because change starts exactly at this point. When you understand that you don't need to become another person to stop losing money, you just need to change the way you start the month. If this video helped you in any way, leave a like so more people who are going through this can find this content. Subscribe to the channel to keep following honest conversations about real money and real life. And comment the word control down below so I know you watched until the end and that this topic spoke to you.